Thank you again, Ajahn, for your precious time to join us again this Wednesday.
Just like you, I also have lots of precious time at the moment. So.
Everyone is having precious time, Ajahn.
That's good, isn't it? And I think we have some questions and answers.
It's a question about metta meditation. I sometimes been troubled by the thought that not all beings can be happy.
Right.
One animal's happiness might involve eating another.
Yeah.
How should I deal with this? Put in different words, how to reconcile dukkha with metta?
So with metta, so dukkha is a noble truth. It's a pervasive characteristic of the conditioned world. So metta doesn't change that. Doesn't change the condition. Doesn't change the conditioned world. But metta is also a condition. But we're not saying in Buddhism that metta changes the nature of samsara. But it's a wish. So it's not a concept. You don't have to think about the details of another being's happiness. What we were just doing now, we were generating a feeling of goodwill, an energy of unconditional love, and you're radiating that out. So one of the reasons I like to get people to reflect on the fact of suffering and how suffering is experienced, but basically it hurts. And part of the reason I like to get people to do that is to get out of the head and to have a look in that heart area and see, oh, this is what we're really dealing with at the heart of the matter, is a lot of pain. And then a skillful way to respond to pain is with care. So you don't have to think of the details of how the animal might be happy. You just wish them happiness. Now, it does have some effect. Metta might not make somebody perfectly 100% happy, but it probably makes them a little happier. I think most people have that experience if they come to visit one of their Ajahns, and if their Ajahn cultivates metta and they're chatting and the Ajahns radiating loving kindness, you feel happier. It doesn't mean that every problem in your life is solved, but there is an increase in happiness. So there's less suffering. So in Buddhism, we're trying to go beyond suffering, and that's a gradual process. And if something reduces suffering a bit, it's a good thing. So we try to get out of the head. Basically, any being in a conditioned realm is going to have lots and lots of suffering. Even if we spread metta to them, that's just the way it is. That's why people aspire to realize nibbana. But radiating loving kindness to beings does help them to have less suffering. And it's very pleasant for oneself. So at the time that it's called a divine abiding, so at the time that a person is radiating loving kindness, that person has a mind like a deva. And if their loving kindness is very powerful, they have a mind like a Brahma deva, metta jhana. So for oneself, it increases our happiness, increases our merits. It also reduces the level of anger, ill will, and hatred, which is something we need to do. We need to weaken greed and hatred before we can completely eradicate it. So it's an important tool. So try not to think about it too much. Just get in touch with the feeling. Just get in touch with the fact that you really would like it if everybody could be well and happy. See, that's our potential. So it is possible, but it's more of a optimistic long-term view. Now, ultimately, when you're wishing somebody to be well and happy, you're wishing that they realize nibbana and liberate themselves from the painful conditions. That's real happiness. Until then, you wish them more supportive conditions. Blessings come into their life, good opportunities. Things like may medicines work, for example. That's part of loving kindness wish. It's like okay, we might be having some illness, but may medicines be effective? May illnesses go away quickly? May there be as little pain as possible? So basically, may there be less suffering and more pleasure, more happiness. So yeah. And this is a challenge for a lot of modern people, is how much we think. If you look at factors of jhana, there is vitakka, vichara, piti, sukha, ekagata. Vitakka and vichara, picking up an object, and vichara is exploring the object and settling on the object. Piti is rapture, sukha is tranquility, ekagata is one-pointedness. A problem most modern meditators have is that at the second part, investigating the object and settling on the object, most modern people think about the object too much. And if you're thinking about the object too much, well, how does this work? Well, how does that work? Well, why is it like that? During the time of the meditation isn't the time to be doing that. During the time of the meditation is the time to be giving oneself to the meditation object. And you can study about metta, and you can study other teachings, when you're listening to Dhamma or studying texts. But when you're meditating, giving yourself to the meditation object, that's when feelings of rapture and tranquility and finally one-pointedness can occur. But because we like to think about, worry about, doubt about, wonder about the meditation object, a lot of people don't go much deeper into the tranquility and the rapture and the one-pointedness. So try to be mindful that we have to set the intention to really be with the meditation object and not think about it too much, and come into that heart area. And a lot of successful meditation is letting go. So letting go of the 5 hindrances, one of which is doubt. So that would be doubting about how metta works, doubting about this. So we get more skilled at recognizing what the hindrance is, because they can be very sneaky and very tricky. And but the more you meditate, you become familiar with the hindrances, and you become more skilled at letting them go. So I hope that was helpful.
Sadhu, Ajahn, thank you. Second question, Ajahn, is how does a person know when he or she achieves Sotāpanna level? Thank you.
This is the trick question. Someone in Melbourne at the Buddhist Society of Victoria once asked me, and I knew she was trying to test me. She said, Ajahn Achalo, is becoming a Sotāpanna easy or difficult? And she smiled. And I think if I was to say, oh, it's easy, she'd be thinking, Ajahn a Sotāpanna. And if I said, oh, it's very difficult, she'd be thinking, oh, Ajahn doesn't know what he's talking about yet. So basically, it's not that easy. Whether a person attains to Sotāpanna. So it's a tricky question. There's a lot of nuance to this question, and I have to be very skillful in how I answer it. So even if a person has the right methods and practices very diligently, doesn't necessarily mean they would attain stream entry this life. This is because stream entry, the mind crosses over. So the mind will experience nibbana, right? So the mind which has been conditioned and bound by conditions has an experience of the unconditioned. A significant experience. I mean, not talking about like a 1-second flash. It's like the practitioner experiences nibbana. The qualities of the stream enterer are that they no longer have doubts about the correct mode of practice. The reason they no longer have doubts about the correct mode of practice is because however it was that they were practicing that led to that experience is obviously the correct mode of practice. So a person will need to have quite a lot of mindfulness present to have that experience, and quite a bit of collectedness. So if a person has a lot of mindfulness and a lot of collectedness, they know exactly what they're meditating upon, what they're contemplating, the manner in which they're contemplating, and then they have that experience. And they know, I think the difference between a person experiencing nibbana and experiencing a jhanic state is the quality of knowing in the mind that knows nibbana is different to the absorbed, still, one-pointed state. So a person would know this is nibbana. And a person's experience will be one of absolutely no suffering. So nibbana is a complete cessation of suffering. So what happens in that experience is that, as Ajahn explains it, most of the kilesa are exploded out of the mind at the stream entry level. That's why I'm saying it's not an easy thing to accomplish, because from there on, in a way, most of the work has already been done. Because having experienced nibbana, the mind, there's a phrase called change of lineage. The mind has entered a noble lineage. The mind has become noble. Having experienced nibbana, a large amount of greed, hatred, and delusion has been obliterated. But a Sotāpanna still experiences greed and hatred, but they will have much, much more mindfulness of it, so much less likely to act on it. But how do you know if you're a stream enterer? So if you're looking at the classic description, unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So many modern people can think, yeah, I have unshakable faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. I mean, most of us have a lot of faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Another way Sotāpanna is described is that they don't have faith in rites and rituals, or they don't deludedly believe that the rite and the ritual is the thing that will get them enlightened. So if a person has not yet experienced nibbana, this is a tendency that people have to think, I just need to do this a certain amount, I need to do this a certain amount, maybe this will work, maybe that will work, I need this method, I need these mantras, there's a sense of when I get certain things and get a certain combination of conditions together, or do a certain number of ceremonies, these kind of things, that will lead to enlightenment. So that's an assumption that people have. Now, of course, we do need to get a certain amount of conditions together, but getting right mindfulness, right concentration on a foundation of impeccable virtue, that's not superstitious rites and rituals, that's correct practice. So if a person thinks, I have unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and I don't believe that rites and rituals will get me enlightened, and I've had some insight into not self. So a person might think that they're a stream enterer, but it's not necessarily the unshakable insight that completely changed the mind, where becoming an arahant is destined. Nothing can stop it. I mean, it's a very, very powerful experience. Ajahn says, normally if a person attains to stream enterer, that sense of having had a big insight and of things having really changed, he said should last about 3 days, 2 to 3 days. So what many people experience in retreats is what's called vipassana jnana, insight, knowledge. And so this is valid, this is wonderful. And basically what's going to happen is, depending on one's level of spiritual qualities, people will start to have kanika samadhi, temporary samadhi, upajara samadhi, neighborhood samadhi, so 5 minutes of peacefulness, 20 minutes of peacefulness. And then a person will begin to have vipassana jnana, clear insights into anicca or dukkha or anatta. And in those clear insights, there will be a feeling of letting go of suffering and letting go of the self-view falling away for a period of time. But it will be more a sense of 15 or 20 minutes. And it's building wisdom bharami, and it's weakening ignorance, and it's ripening the mind for the for the experience of Sotāpanna. What normally happens next is a person can have what's called the Gotrabu Vijnana. So that's the change of lineage experience. So what happens there is a person experiences Nibbana, maybe not for the 2 or 3 days, but they do experience it. But because of the power of kilesa and karma, it comes back. So Ajahn describes that it's like Nibbana is described as the other shore. So you jumped over onto the other shore, but the weight of karma and delusion pulled you back. But you saw it. And apparently the merit of that insight, you did have an experience, a person has had an experience of Nibbana. And the merit of that insight is that before a person dies, they will become a stream enterer. That's how powerful it is. So when we read in the suttas that somebody is listening to a teaching and they became an arahant by the end of the teaching, one thing to keep in mind is that many of those people were stream enterers already. Because after stream entry, you can't have more than 7 lives. But if suppose you became a stream enterer and you might have made a vow that you wanted to become an arahant under the guidance of a Buddha, so that vow, you might have had a heavenly rebirth after that, and then you come down with these people that become monks at very early ages or become these rishis, matted hair ascetics, very high level of virtue and amazing samadhi, and they hear a teaching and they become an arahant. So many of them would have already done quite a bit of practice. So for 2,600 years after the Buddha, I think in general, I think we'd accept that the people who really had a lot of merit probably practiced with the Buddha. And those of us who turn up 2,600 years later are building our merits. And but Kanika Samadhi is good. 5 minutes of peacefulness is good. Upajjhara Samadhi is good. Vipassana Jnana is good. Most likely people are likely to have that kind of experience during a retreat. And one of the reasons I push people to sit a lot and walk a lot and hopefully not talk too much in retreats is because that's the kind of intensity that makes the mindfulness consistent enough, sharp enough, powerful enough, and those moments of samadhi to build, that those path factors, bright mindfulness, bright concentration, and wisdom can come together and merge in the mind, and the ignorance falls away for a period of time. But that's what we need to do. We need to get the mindfulness so consistent, stop feeding the self-view, which feeds more ignorance, it's delusion. So this is why intensive retreats are great. Noble speech, not feeding a sense of self, generating a powerful, clear sense of mindfulness, and that gives rise to samma samadhi, right collectedness. And then you're seeing anicchang of the feelings, or contemplating body parts and having an insight into not self. But a Sotāpanna, one of the qualities of a Sotāpanna is that they don't doubt. They don't doubt. It's not really an attainment. It's more like, how I understand it, is a relinquishment. It's giving up a belief that the body and mind is a self. Because the mind has experienced a quality of awareness which isn't affected by a self-view, the mind then knows that there is something else. And because in that experience it's so much more peaceful and there's no suffering, the mind also trusts that. And so coming out of that experience, a person isn't going to doubt what they just experienced. Something with no suffering, something incredibly pleasant. And because the quality of mindfulness that led up to it was very sharp, and the quality of presence in the experience is also very sharp, they know what they were practicing, they know what they experienced, and they know it's wonderful, the most wonderful thing they ever experienced so far, and then it's not likely that they will doubt that. So that's one of the qualities of the Sotāpanna, is having seen through self-view, it understands that interpreting the body and feelings and thoughts as a self is a view. That doesn't mean it goes away. That's important to understand as well. It's a very, very deep habit. But the stream enterer knows that it's an habitual way of seeing things, which is not the deeper truth. And they've seen the deeper truth. So they're not as deluded by it. They've had an insight into it being a view, something a result of past karma, believing it in the past. with the vipassana jnana, insight knowledge, it tends to be something that decreases delusion for a period of time and increases wisdom for a period of time, but it will generally fade with time, and the habitual sense of being a self comes back. And if we meditate less, then it can come back quite strong, and it's almost like you didn't really get anywhere, and you have to practice hard again. But depending on our level of accumulated virtue, so when that woman asked the question in Melbourne, is it easy to become a stream enterer or difficult to become a stream enterer? It really depends on how much practice we've done. So if you've done a lot of correct practice in the past, it will be easy. And if you've done, but it was hard in the past. And if we haven't yet done a lot of practice, then it might be difficult. And but whether it's easy or difficult, we just have to practice, don't we? I hope that made sense.
Right, Ajahn, the next question is, can Ajahn talk about different kinds of metta, warm, cool, etc.?
So in my experience, in my own, everybody's got slightly different karmic cocktail that they have to work with, depending on what you've thought and how you've thought and what your character traits are. So different people will get different results from different kind of nuance and attitude. But for myself, I find that for the first 5 minutes, a quality of loving acceptance, which is cool. This is kind of, I'm just accepting this, I'm allowing this, I'm not adding anything. I'm dropping any judgment and simply allowing this to be exactly how it is. For me, that's a cool experience. Then once that kind of coolness is established, there's no fault finding, there's no ill will, there's no suspiciousness, that kind of thing. Once that loving accepting quality is genuinely established, then I would add the warmth of a positive wish for goodwill. So that's just what works for myself. And then once that warmth is flowing with the breath and with those words and with that intention, then it's radiating out that warmth. Some people also find that compassion is a cooler quality than metta. And metta is a warm quality, and compassion is a cool quality. But I think it's a matter of experimenting what works. But what works for me is 5 minutes of loving acceptance, because a lot of modern people have a bit of an issue with self-loathing or being hypercritical. And our culture is very hypercritical. Well, media is just always ripping apart politicians and media personalities, and the news, very kind of cynical and mean. So we are affected by that. And so just loving it as it is first. Because I think initially we actually have to drop the ill will and the cynicism. So it's like, I think most people can assume that there's some of that affecting the mind when we come, because it's so pervasive in our culture. So dropping that, and then once we've dropped that, and there's another thing to understand as well, is if we indulge that a lot on the outside, cynical thoughts, angry thoughts, and critical thoughts about politicians or government policies or whatever, if we make a lot of karma with it outside, when we come to meditate, that same energy and that same habit then turns inward, because that's the lens that we've been looking at life through. So we do have to be careful about nasty YouTube comments, nasty Twitter comments, these kind of things, because the more we do that outside, it comes back as well.
Thank you,
So
Ajahn.
loving acceptance, and then radiating that warmth, and then really doing that first step, like really holding it in that heart area so that you can really feel a loving, warm feeling, and then radiating that outwards. It's like charging the battery first before you radiate outwards.
Thank you, Ajahn. The next question is, I love the notion that there are subtle bodied beings out there, and their support of us when we are challenged. Can Ajahn talk about that a bit? Thank you.
I think even human beings, let's start with human beings. And the story that's coming to mind is there was a time when Ajahn Chah was walking through the jungle, and he had malaria fever, and he was so sick, he literally lay down on them. I think it was another day's walk or 12 hours walk away from a proper village. I don't even know if he knew where the village was, but it was just literally in the middle of the jungle. And so he lay down to die. And he's okay, well, I guess I'm going to die. And back in his village in Ubon province, his mum had a terrible feeling that her son had died. And she wanted to make merit. She wanted to make merit for him. And it's one of those mother's intuitions, just kind of a horrible, worried feeling. And so she went to the temple and made merit for him. So Lumpur Cha was, at that stage, did not yet have like the full psychic powers and amazing abilities as a younger monk, and also because he was very unwell. So he suddenly felt a burst of life force, and he just felt well enough and strong enough to walk to the next village. And then he got the herbal medicine, which helped him get over his malaria. Now, when he finally got back to Ubon, he had this strong feeling of somebody just helped me, something just helped me. And so he checked with his family, and sure enough, the mother made the merit right at that occasion and transferred the merit to him. And because of the close connection between mother and son, the Lumpur Cha received the merit, and it literally manifested as life force, life-giving life force and energy that saved his life. It's pretty amazing. But other ways I've experienced it in my life is one story I often tell is when I was in Ladakh, and I was in a very remote place, Lake Somariri, on the border of Tibet at 5,000 meters high. Idyllic, this beautiful 20-kilometer wide turquoise-colored lake. Beautiful. The perfect place, you know, you've gone all that way to the Himalayas, you want to meditate by the lake, and we're there. But what happened was I started to just get a terrible feeling. There were big clouds in the sky, and for me, living in tropical Asia, so what? There's always big tropical clouds. The Malaysians and the Singaporeans will understand that as well. But it doesn't rain in Ladakh, it only snows. We didn't know that. So, but myself and Francois, who was with me, we both just had this nagging feeling, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. Which didn't make any sense at all, because it was pretty as a picture. And we'd spent a lot of effort to get there. And we'd acclimated to the elevation, having got through our headaches. It was like, and there was going to be an archery show with some Tibetan nomads the next day, kind of a once in a lifetime, okay, let's watch the nomads on the horses kind of thing. But this feeling of, I have to leave, we have to leave, we have to leave. So I didn't want to say anything because my friend, obviously these things cost money, hiring a car, prepaying the accommodation, getting the food, we've got the driver, all of that costs money. So it's like, okay, we're supposed to spend 5 days here. We'd only been there 2 days. And I said to him, Francois, I don't know why, but I just have this really strong feeling that we should leave. And he says, Ajahn, I have the exact same feeling. I didn't want to say anything either because we spent so much effort to get here. So, okay, we're leaving tomorrow. So we left the next day. It rained all night that night. Again, didn't mean anything to me. But you need to understand that the Himalayas mountains are just where two continents crashed into each other and they just kind of went up and up and up. So some of those mountains are big solid rocks, but other of those mountains is basically dust and pebbles and rocks piled very high. So what happens is if rain rains on them, they're not very solid. And so what occurred was, it turns out that we left about half an hour before the road was closed by a mudslide, completely closed. And we got over the bridge, 2 bridges over the, I think it's the Indus River, before the bridges were washed away. So normally in Ladakh, you get a gentle snow melt, trickling beautiful clear streams. But because it rained all night, heavy rain, it was horrible. Hundreds of people died in their sleep because there were mudslides overnight. That next night, as as the mud basically just slid down this. I remember coming into that lake, and there's these big boulders everywhere in the valley, and it's so picturesque. We literally stopped and had a picnic surrounded by flowers, looking at these. It's like if there were creator gods, it's like gods just placed these beautiful big rocks, magically, and we're sitting in the flowers, and how beautiful it was. And then you're coming out, and you suddenly realize that those rocks were not placed here by God. You look outside the window, and you see that there's all these other really big rocks on the mountain waiting to slide down the hill. And so we were driving out, and we were having to dodge big rocks that had fallen on the road. And we're suddenly aware of there's a lot more of those rocks. So I was doing the Metta Sutta all the way back from Lake Somariri to Leh city, kind of may one of these big rocks not roll on the car. So anyway, so how do benevolent unseen beings help us? So I think that for myself in my life, that's a clear example that probably an unseen being was aware that this was about to happen, and we weren't aware of that because we didn't know that rain was unusual in that part of the world. And it manifested actually as an irritated feeling, a feeling of like, we have to get the hell out of here quickly. So we had a bunch of friends there, a Tibetan lady who lived in Australia with 20 Australian tourists, and they had to climb out of the mountain, straight up the mountain and down into another valley to get to another road because they couldn't get over the road and they didn't have the right gear, and it was very difficult. So anyway, we had enough intuitive sensitivity, or maybe we didn't have the karma that we had to experience that particular type of suffering at that time. At the same trip, we had to leave. I said to Francois I was willing to go to Ladakh with him. He really wanted to go to Ladakh if he helped me to go to Jetavana. And so after Ladakh, we went to Savatthi, Jetavana, where Lord Buddha spent 18 rainy season retreats. At those days, the road was still pretty bad, and from Savatthi to Lucknow. So it's early in the morning, and Francois comes to me and says, Ajahn, we have to go to the airport 5 hours early. And I'm like, what? Well, I don't want to hang out at some Indian airport for 5 hours. So anyway, but I trusted him. He says, he actually used the words, my devas told me, Ajahn, we have to go 5 hours early. I'm like, okay. So people who meditate a lot, they do get more sensitive, and he's been given the role of he has to take care of the Ajahn during this period of time. So anyway, we ended up getting 3 flat tires on the way to the airport. And we got to the airport 1 hour late. We left 5 hours, and we left 5 hours extra, and it took us 6 hours extra. Unfortunately, the airplane was delayed 1 hour. So, so it was true. We really just needed 5 hours extra, and we got there just in time. And then we got our connecting flight from Delhi, and we literally had to run to the gate. I remember this. I think the airline Kingfisher has since gone bankrupt, but actually they had very good service because the Delhi airport, getting luggage through security can take quite a while. And so there's this Kingfisher worker there, like yelling at the guy and asking, is there any Kingfisher people going to Bangkok? Yes. And she's like yelling at the baggage guy, get him through, they've got to go. And she's like walking alongside us, and she's like, sir, I need to explain to you that the gate is quite some distance. Oh, okay. So I'm walking fast, and she says, no, sir, you're actually going to have to run. And she's like coaching us, and she's literally running alongside of us because the Delhi airport is huge. And I think the low-cost airlines have the furthest gates like a long way away. So we're like running, and this woman's like coaching us. Good, yeah. Anyway, so I was impressed with the Kingfisher staff, and we got onto the plane just as they slammed the door behind us. And so anyway, that's one of the ways that benevolent beings might make themselves known is but I've had all sorts of experiences, but I have to be careful. I'm bound by my rules, you see. I'm not supposed to talk about, but I want to say that I don't have any doubt that benevolent beings help good people. And I have to choose these kind of obvious physical stories to demonstrate, because I'm not allowed to talk about visions or things I heard in meditation or things like that. So, but suffice to say, the good take care of the good. Well, one of the ways that Devas also want to make merit. So one of the ways Devas make merit is helping virtuous human beings. And one of the benefits of Devanusati, recollecting the existence of Devas, is that as you develop affection for Devas, Devas develop affection for you. So it's kind of a simple analogy of love and be loved. You love the good, then the good love you also. And it's also one of the benefits of metta, that the Devas will take care of one. So Lord Buddha's very clear about it. But I think many people just have experienced intuition, a sense of something being right or a sense of something being wrong. And what is that? Like, I think one of the ways Devas communicate to us is by giving us a strong feeling of, you can trust this person, don't trust that person, or this is a good idea or that's not a good idea. And also I think through dreams, possibly. If you have some kind of a premonition, or a dream gives you you have some kind of a symbol or premonition in a dream, gives you some kind of clarity about what to do in your life, that might also be a way that guardian angels guide you or help you. So. I got another story. Ajahn Sudanto was in the jungle in the middle of nowhere, and Ajahn Anan came to the jungle that year. I was telling the story last week about how I met Ajahn Anan. And I remember the story of, he gave me his piece of pizza. So pizza came up in another conversation. Ajahn Sudanto was saying, you know, Ajahn Anan, I think I must have made a lot of good karma feeding monks or offering food in past lives, because although I try not to do it, but suppose I have the thought, for example, I really want to eat pizza. He said, often the next day, some pizza comes. And then Ajahn Anan says, well, yeah, so that probably means that you've offered a lot of food and you've given people things that they like, so that when you want something that you like, it comes. So we're on the way out of the jungle, somewhere between the border of Burma and the town of Kanchanaburi. It's like a 5 or 6 hour drive, and we're 2 hours into it. And there's another car coming the other way. It's a dirt road. There's no village. It's like 11 o'clock in the morning. We had our meal at 8. And the driver stops us and he says, oh, I was coming out to see you guys. I really wanted to make an offering. I have pizza. Can I give it to you now? So I would deduce that a deva heard Ajahn Sudanto say, or quite possibly Ajahn Anan told a deva, whatever. Somehow the message got to that layperson by pizza. And obviously Ajahn Sudanto has made good karma, because it's pretty unusual to be offered a pizza in the middle of nowhere. There isn't even a town. So things like that lead me to believe that benevolent unseen beings are around.
Thank you, Ajahn. The next question is pizza. Yeah, okay. It's just hang on. Where's the question now?
I'll tell you one last story. See, once you get me in story mode, can't shut me up. It takes a while. I have to kind of click into gears. So this is really interesting. This was, my father was dying of a stroke, right? I was in Amaravati Monastery. I had a mobile phone. I had it on me, which is something I never do. But the reason I did was because nobody had my number except my twin brother and my younger brother. So the reason I had the phone was in case something happened with my parents, my mum and dad could contact me. So I was at the meal line in Amaravati and I got a text message, bing, 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 bing. I'm like, oh, well, so that had never happened. So I went quickly to a side room and I had a look at the text message, and my brother said, call me now. So I quickly went to where their phone was and I called my brother, and my brother's crying and he's like, Ajahn, oh, I don't want to tell you this, but Dad's had a stroke. I'm like, yeah. And he says, and then he's like crying, and the doctor says he'll be dead in 5 hours. Like, oh. At which point I started to cry. It's kind of like just the tears come out. I was like, oh, Dad's dying. And I'm in London. I'm not going to be able to get back to Australia. So anyway, I didn't feel like eating my meal and just left it there. I went back to my kuti and I thought, you know what, I should do some chanting for my dad. At least I can chant for my dad while he's dying and dedicate a portion of the merit of being a bhikkhu to my father. And so I put his picture on the shrine and I bowed to the Buddha Dhamma and Sangha, and I was thinking of my father and I was chanting. I was very committed to doing this chanting puja for my father. But halfway through the chanting, I just had this feeling, call Ajahn Anan. Oh, so I completely stopped my chanting. I called Ajahn Anan. Ajahn Anan picked up. What is it, Achalu? My father's had a stroke and he's dying. Could you please spread loving kindness to him? Ajahn Anan made this kind of noise. Kind of like, and that noise, I know his noises very well, and that noise meant he wasn't pleased by that information. And yes, he was going to do something about it. And then I went back to my puja. And then I just had this feeling, 10 minutes later, I had this feeling of everything's fine. And I wanted my lunch. So what's going on? My brother calls and he says, you won't believe it, because my father was going into a coma and he was shaking and he was going into the process of dying. And they knew from the vital signs that he had 5 hours left. And people who work with dying people know these things very well. So anyway, my twin brother says, you won't believe this. Dad just woke up. He said he needed to go to the toilet. He wouldn't wait for the nurse. And he's just walked into the toilet and gone to the bathroom. So there's several points to this story. I would assume that it's a guardian angel that is saying to me, some kind of deva that is saying to me halfway through my puja, Achalo, call Ajahn Anan. Because it really didn't seem like it came from my mind. I was very committed to dedicating the merits to my father. And then again, when Dad's okay, how is it that I know that? It's just manifesting as a feeling of he's all right now. So my father did live, I think, another 9 years after that. So, and he had a pretty good recovery. And that 9 years gave my mum time to get used to the idea of letting him go. So I think also the merit that I was sharing probably played a factor. I think the doctor injected something at the same time, but those things are probably linked, like why the doctor suddenly has some medicine that he thinks might work and he's giving it a go. And obviously Ajahn Anan spreading metta. And I think getting the merit through, like I have the merit of being a bhikkhu and spreading loving kindness, but with someone with Ajahn Anan's caliber, he's like making sure that file gets through, like now. He's the CEO. He's like, get that file through now. So anyway, Dad ended up living another 8 or 9 years. So enough stories. Next question.
Okay, Ajahn. Hi, Ajahn. Fear and worry keeps coming up throughout the day. During meditation, sometimes it still appears. How to resolve fear and worry that keep replaying in my head?
Yeah. So I don't think we can make them completely go away. And especially in challenging circumstances. So you have to kind of get it at the right amount. So it might be the case that you give yourself permission to be scared and worried for 10 minutes. Just, maybe there's things to be scared about or worried about. So you say to yourself, okay, for this 5 or 10 minutes, you can be really scared and really worried and feel what that's like. But then after 10 minutes to say to yourself, but it's not actually helping anything, is it? And you got ask yourself, challenge it. Is this helping? No, it's not helping. Okay. So you've felt the fear, you've felt the worry, and now let's do something else. So then if there's a lot of fear and worry, it might not be the case that with our level of mindfulness that you can just drop it. A person with a very good quality of mindfulness would be able to, but people have good mindfulness sometimes, not such good mindfulness sometimes, and these hindrances come in. Part of it is karma as well. We're all born in this world at this time with a particular karma, and maybe we have to experience a certain amount of fear and worry. That's part of our karma. But what you can do then is an energetic session of chanting. So chant for half an hour, your favorite sutta. So this is like just placing the mind on another object where it has to give attention to that object, and an object that requires focus. So maybe one of the long suttas that you really have to look at the book to do. So if you decide, for example, to chant the first 3 cardinal suttas, Dhammacakka, Anattalaka, Adittapariyaya Sutta, it's going to take you about 40 minutes and half an hour if you're fast and adept. By the end of that 40 minutes, I don't think you're going to be experiencing much fear or worry, because the mind is with the chanting object. You need to understand that mind picks up objects. So the thing about the fear and the worry is like, oh, how many cases today? Oh, how's my grandma? Oh, is it going to be, they flatten the curve? Is there going to be a spike in the curve or whatever? Keep hearing the news as you get a text message, you get things that stimulate the fear, keep stimulating the fear. So it's like, turn off your device, turn off the TV, do your 40 minutes of chanting. By the end of that 40 minutes, there isn't going to, and also because the mind will be wholesome, it will have a kind of a natural resistance to that fear and worry getting into the same degree again. For a period of time, you're just going to feel okay. And similarly, I mean, the monks have to practice with this as well. Traditionally, the forest monks would go somewhere where the ghosts were, or go somewhere where the tigers were, because if a person has some issues with laziness or has some issues with oversleeping, which many people do, if you're going to where the tigers are, you're not going to be lying around sleeping any more than you need to because you're scared of the tigers. It wakes you up. So that's one of the ways that monks force themselves to develop more wakefulness, was to go to the scary place. And if you're really, really scared of ghosts, you're not going to be wanting to go to sleep early. You're going, it's like, but they do the chanting and they spread the metta. It forces them to do wholesome, positive things because they have enough mindfulness and wisdom. I have a selection of practices that they can do. They don't just let their mind fall into the fear, but because there is fear, they're very eager to pick up the wholesome objects, the chanting, or sometimes it might be walking meditation swiftly, rapidly, Buddha, 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 really feeling that body moving and getting grounded in those physical sensations. So it's not that you won't experience it, but you need to learn how to manage it and allow yourself to experience it for periods. And I mean, sometimes we really have to look at the situation and make some provisional plans and keep reviewing that. I mean, fear and worry also has a function. It makes us pay attention, and it makes us think about what we need to do. But there's a point where it's enough, and time to put the mind on something wholesome. So replacement by opposites. Drop the unskillful object by picking up a wholesome one. But sometimes you have to be vigorous. You have to be determined. We have to be honest about the fact that our mindfulness isn't good enough. So Luang Por Chah says half of practice is knowing what we need to let go, but not being able to. But in knowing what you need to let go and in really trying to, that's what's conditioning that capacity to be mindful and wise and have the power to let go in the future.
Okay, this one is, hi Ajahn. Sometimes I'm very motivated to practice. Other times I would have a very strong resistance to meditate, which I have identified as due to lack of faith in the Buddha Dhamma. How do I overcome that?
That's interesting. I'm going to have to think about this because I'm ever since I met Buddha Dhamma, had a strong quality of faith. So that's not been something that I've had to practice much with. I've had to practice more with doubting my abilities, but I never doubted the Buddha or his teachings. Why would you doubt the Buddha? I guess it's one of those things. You either have faith or you don't. In, for example, nibbana. Like, do you have faith that there is an unconditioned? Do you have faith that it is possible to transcend all suffering? So that's I think you probably say most people who choose to practice Buddhism do. But in Asia, sometimes people are born into a Buddhist family and they're told we're Buddhists, and they might not necessarily have that faith. But for myself, as a young person, I was searching for something that I knew was there. It's an intuition, and I hadn't found it yet. So when I found Buddhist practice, there was that sense of recognition of, oh, this is what I've been looking for. So there's probably a latent sense of faith that was already there, and having done some practice, that when you meet the practice again, there is already confidence about it. So if you do believe there is nibbana, if you do believe that a cessation of suffering is possible, then I think then a certain amount of humility, we have to admit that we wouldn't have worked that out ourselves. And then we have to acknowledge that it's the Buddha that is an ancient path which is overgrown, and a Buddha clears the path and rediscovers it. It's sometimes explained that way. So the path to Nibbana is always there, but whether or not we know it. And so a Buddha, because of his profound spiritual qualities and extra sharp spiritual faculties, is able to find that deathless. And then he's able to explain the set of conditions, the Eightfold Path, that we need to cultivate so that we also travel down that path and experience the deathless. So I think if you can admit, if you believe that liberation and Nibbana is real, then we feel grateful to Lord Buddha for explaining that fact. And I think that gratitude, just acknowledgement that Nibbana is real, because Nibbana is real, the Buddha must be real. Somebody had to experience that and explain that experience and explain the conditions that lead to that experience, and then to feel gratitude. I think that will help one feel faith. As you're grateful to the Buddha, and then you want to. For myself, when I was after my 10th rainy season retreat, I went to Bodh Gaya, and I was doing some full-length prostrations in front of the Bodhi tree in India, and it was kind of a slightly unusual thing to be doing for a Theravadan forest monk. You have to take your robe off, and you're like throwing yourself on the ground in front of the Bodhi tree. And I didn't care. I didn't have any self-consciousness, because what was coming up for me was just deep gratitude and love. And there was a recognition for myself, at least, there was a recognition. If it were not for you, Lord Buddha, I would be on my way to hell now. I just knew it. So I'm thinking of the Buddha. Lord Buddha saved me from hell. Well, I didn't doubt the existence of hell by that stage. So I don't care who says, you're a Theravadan monk, you shouldn't be bowing like this. Why aren't you wearing your robe? I don't care. The Buddha saved me from hell. I'm grateful, and I'm bowing. So, and acts like that deepen faith. And I guess meeting masters who have special abilities, that can also help. And I suppose you visit Ajahn or you visit Lumpur Part, somebody who clearly has some kind of psychic power and who is willing to answer some questions, and then you realize this person really has access to something that I don't have access to, and that has to come from mental cultivation. And so visiting people who inspire faith, And we kind of, there is conceit functioning in the mind, grasping at views, or one of the reasons we have some resistance to feeling faith is thinking that we're pretty special. That's just one of the ways it manifests. It's like, I don't need them, I'm okay. But the problem is, when you have some serious suffering in your life, you do need help. And so yes, thinking about Nibbana, thinking about the person who revealed the path to Nibbana, generating gratitude, finding ways to demonstrate that gratitude, offering flowers, bowing. And I think that gratitude leads into a feeling of loving devotion and faith. Faith doesn't necessarily have to be a effusive, heart-like quality. It can be confidence. To have confidence in the teachings, confidence in the Buddha's liberation. But once you have confidence and you feel grateful, for most people it also becomes a blossoming of this loving devotion as well. But, it has to be cultivated. Faith is a spiritual power, and the 5 spiritual powers lead to the deathless and merge in the deathless. It's not a given that everybody has a lot of it. With my character, I did. Literally from the beginning of practice, had a lot of faith in the Buddha and the Dhamma and the methods. And I don't think I would have made it 24 years without that, so I'm grateful. But that, I would assume, came from past practice. The faith is based upon the fact that if you practice correctly, you experience more peace for yourself and less suffering.
Then the last question we have is, during lockdown, how not to argue with family members, have some restraint? Why do we tend to take people close to us for granted and nice to friends?
Terrible. I don't know, but it's very common, isn't it? So I think this, I mean, I say it every week, and it's for a reason. Getting up in the morning and generating the mindfulness and establishing the loving kindness before you go out and engage with the world. Because we have to, it's like pressing refresh, or resetting the software. You're going to have loving kindness towards the people in the world, including especially those who care for you the most. One thing to reflect upon is something that Ajahn Ganha said was to Ajahn Siddhanta many years ago. He said, people make a lot of bad karma with the people that they love, not really realizing it, precisely for this reason. So you might say something, you get into nagging each other, or you get into insulting each other, or even to playful teasing. But if it actually really hurts the feelings of someone who cares for you, every time you hurt their feelings, you are sowing the karmic cause for your feelings to be hurt in the future. So next time you wonder, somebody comes along and says something really horrible, really nasty, and you didn't say anything nasty to them, and you're having like, why did they say that to me? I'm so nice. It's like, well, what about what you said to your mum? What about what you said to your dad? What about what you said to your sister 100 times, 1,000 times? Now it's check bill time. Someone's coming back saying something nasty to you. It hurts, doesn't it? So it accumulates. The way we make conscious beings feel with intention is going to come back at us, and we're going to feel that way. So sometimes a little bit of wholesome fear is a good thing. You just have to say to yourself, okay, well, do you want the people that you're in relationship with, a young person or a child, but when you grow up and you have this fantasy about getting married, you want a really beautiful partner, don't you? Someone who's going to speak to you with kindness and who's going to be supportive. So if you're nasty to your brothers and sisters and nasty to your mum and dad, you're making the karma where it's quite likely that you're going to have a nasty partner. So to put some thought into it, that's how it's going to come back. Or their in-laws, for example. Your in-laws might be really mean to you. So.
Thank you, Ajahn. Ajahn, we have another 2 more questions coming in. So one of it is, last night, I searched the Great Compassion mantra on YouTube,
Right.
and I listened
Right.
to a recording by a Tibetan nun. While I listened within the first few seconds, this profound feeling of bliss, tinged with a little sadness, came over me. Could it be from past practice in the Mahayana?
It could be. I also think these chants have a vibration, a resonance. So the great compassion mantra will have a compassionate resonance in it. And sometimes if you feel that someone has compassion for you, whatever sadness is in your mind is able to flow through. It's kind of like healing. But if a person feels a deep sense of familiarity and very comfortable with that chant, then, and some feelings of rapture, then quite possibly you've done it before.
Thank you, Ajahn. The last question we have on the list. Hi, Ajahn. Lately, my mind tends to go blank or dull during meditation. I'm not sleeping, half awake, and unable to focus on my breath. How can I overcome this and stay focused only breathe to achieve the one-pointedness of the mind?
Yeah, so I think, I'm not sure if this person is chanting before sitting, but in the forest tradition, you'll notice that the monks get up at 3:15 and coming to our morning chanting at 3:30 at Wat Nanachat, and at 5 a.m. in the monasteries, in the Western monasteries. The first thing they do is a half an hour of chanting, half an hour or 45 minutes. And it's not necessarily the case that at 3:30 you feel like chanting for 45 minutes, but it's basically understood that if you don't, if you just sat at 3:30, you'd be falling asleep. But after half an hour or 45 minutes of loud chanting, you are awake, and then you sit. So given that that's the way the practice tradition practices it, and that's what Ajahn Chah arranged as his monastic discipline, and Ajahn Anan as well, basically a half an hour of vigorous chanting before meditation, and then dullness and sleepiness should be less of an issue in general. If it still is an issue, then it could be karma. We have to patiently endure for periods of time as the various hindrances that pass through the mind. And the various hindrances that affect the mind, they change over the years. And there might be a period where there's dullness that we have to work with. But also, a cup of green tea, you don't want to totally caffeinate yourself, but a little bit of caffeine might be helpful. In the Chinese tradition, Japanese tradition, I think drinking tea is, it happens. Nice cup of tea and have a nice long sit.
Good
Night.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye, Sister Liam.
Good night, John.
Good night, Mike. Good night.
Good night. Susan.
Thanks, JC. Good night, Ajahn. Thanks, Joyce. Good night.